topic of the last story, so we're going to keep it together. So this last June, I was invited to visit the Fort McDermit band, I should say the Fort McDermit Indian Reservation. It sort of sits on the Oregon-Nevada border. I got to meet some of their organizers when I was tabling out in the Mission last February. So they put me on to their struggle up there. The communities up there are coming into conflict with a lot of mining companies because there's a massive lithium deposit up in that area. Apparently, probably one of the largest, if not the largest, lithium deposit in North America is right on the Oregon Nevada border, underneath a bunch of Native American reservation land. So I got the opportunity to visit them just a couple weeks ago. It was really great. I wrote about it on my Substack. This article will be linked in the description. You can check it out for a little more in-depth details. But I didn't know much about lithium mining before this. I've seen some one-off web series about things in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The idea of haggard men, women, and children filling up dirt in little baskets so that Apple can make batteries for smartphones. But I didn't really know much beyond that. So it was great to connect with folks over in Fort McDermit. They're organized in what's known as the People of Red Mountain. To introduce them, I want to read from their website. So the People of Red Mountain, Atsakudaka Wianiu in Paiute, is a committee of traditional knowledge keepers and descendants of the Fort McDermit Paiute, Shoshone, and Bannock tribes, working in coalition with allies to protect our ancestral homelands. We have seen the immense impact that mining projects inflict on the land, the destruction of our cultural resources, wildlife habitat, the contamination of our groundwater are unacceptable consequences of these projects. We oppose the extraction of mineral resources from our homelands because we recognize that there is no benefit great enough to outweigh the cost. While offers made by mining interests can be tempting in a small community with limited economic resources, there is nothing in the material world that can replace our clean drinking water, our first foods, or our reciprocal relationship with the land. We know that the land carries our ancestors as well as generations yet unborn. We know that what we do to the land, we do to ourselves. And so, this area right now, it's the geological feature is called the Mcdermit Caldera. It's like this really extinct, volcanic basin that exists as part of the high desert. It's part of how it formed in like the Mesozoic. I've been looking it up. The Mesozoic era. That's when it formed. Long ass time ago. And so right now there's 6 mines planned to be built in this caldera just for lithium, right? And so looking into it, like Nevada's they're pretty deep into mining. In the state of Nevada right now, they have over 200,000 active mines in the state of Nevada. So I was looking up online. Check that up. You can Google it. And just for the state of Nevada alone, they have 180,000 abandoned mines, right? A lot, right? And so in this area, they've already experienced so much of the harm that's come from having active mines and abandoned mines. A lot of the people that I was talking to in McDermit, they really claim, they claim that their area is a cancer hotspot. They all know somebody who's gotten cancer, who's died of cancer. So, there's very much like this fear that lithium mining or a new form of mining is just going to bring an even further pollution onto the area. And so, like I said before, there's 6 mines that are being planned in the Mcdermit Caldera, and at least 2 have some kind of exploratory digging being done. So none of these lithium mines are active extracting lithium, but they're all at different levels called boreholes. So they identify there's a claim there, and they start digging down, figuring out where exactly they're going to extract. And then in order to get these different mines active, they have to get all these different phases of permits, right? And so part of the way that this works is they're supposed to involve the community, or rather, they're supposed to solicit feedback from the community about the impact of their project. And the first of these projects was fast-tracked during the COVID pandemic. What I mean by was that basically nobody was consulted. They just sent a bunch of letters out to vacant administrative buildings, something we're very familiar with. Anybody who did activism during COVID, they loved the fact that nobody was around. And then when they got no response, they were able to quickly get some of those first permits approved. And so that first project put in by Lithium Americas is like one of the most furthest along in terms of its basic exploration, even though I don't believe that they're extracting now. And so, the current administration is really big on mineral extraction. That might be news to some people. But right now, the current Trump administration is fast-tracking a lot of mineral extraction under this idea of national security. Because specifically with rare earth minerals, like lithium, they're very big in some of the competition between the U.S. and China. Because right now, China sits on some of the largest reserves of rare earth minerals, like lithium. So the U.S. desperately wants to sort of change that so they can better compete with China internationally around not just electronics, but also in that greater political sphere. And so, how does this relate to sort of Native American peoples? So in the United States, 97% of all nickel, 89% of copper, 79% of lithium, and 68% of cobalt reserves are all located within 35 miles of a Native American reservation, right? So as the United States accelerates its competition with the U.S. and China, it only means that these native reservations are only going to be more targeted for these different extractive mines. And with these new Trump era policies, these mining companies have even less of a burden to actually even consult local communities about it. And so, I just think that's what kind of I feel like these kind of economic ties, I think, to me, are so important as to outline why I think is that native sovereignty is such a key front in the anti-imperialist struggle. It's like what we see with Palestine. People struggling for a future against these brutal imperialists. But again, I think most people think of the anti-imperialist struggle as just that, right? This struggle, this dire struggle halfway around the world. But I don't think they think that's happening right there in the United States, right? Palestine's also a place where they just found a bunch of oil off the coast there, off the west coast.
Yeah, when I was in New York last year, I was getting ads for trying to get people to buy into Zion oil.
Yeah,
Zionist
crazy,
oil.
Right. So these things are very much, you have these different, there's two sides of the colonial project, right? After they end the war, they begin extraction, right? And so for a lot of the people in Fort McDermott, one of the interesting things was hearing about how the area in the Thacker Pass, it's actually, a lot of these lithium mines are, they're targeted around this area called the Thacker Pass in the McDermit caldera. And it's very interesting because it's a historic and culturally significant site for a lot of the Paiute and Shoshone people, because it specifically used to be the site of an old village that was ultimately the victim of a massacre by the 2nd U.S. Cavalry, I believe during the Modoc War or possibly the Snake War. The U.S. had a lot of different wars it was waging on Native people during the end of the 19th century. And so during one of them, the members of the 2nd Cavalry massacred, I think, at least 31 people in the Thacker Pass, men, women, and children. And so it's known as, I think in their language, it's called the Pahut Mukhun. I'm not saying that correctly. I'll correct it in post. But it means the rotten moon. So when the people found the victims of the massacre, the bodies were all just in one line. They looked like a crescent moon. So it's called the rotten moon, right? And so part of with these lithium mines is they say that one of the threats is not just to their ecosystem, but it's also through just the basic recognition of them as survivors of a genocide, right? That this lithium mining could possibly even eliminate historical traces of this. And of course, the BLM and the government, they deny that, this genocide ever happened there. I don't believe that the United States denies that the genocide ever happened, but they specifically deny it didn't happen in this place with the lithium mines. They're very certain of it. They don't know exactly where it is, but they know it wasn't there. They're very confident of that. But for the people in Fort McDermott, they're kind of facing a threefold problem. There's the external attacks from the colonizers. There's the real issue of the economic underdevelopment of Native nations, and the internal disunity of Native peoples. And I think this last one is really what the people of Red Mountain, what they've really been engaged in. And what I learned from my visit is that they've really been working to really try to bring Native peoples together through like cultural events, through different education events, through these different legal advocacy, through political campaign, really just trying to create dialogue and bring people together around this issue of mining and just around this idea of a shared political and cultural heritage. And so I think, that's been very interesting to see. I got to meet some people. There's some people from visiting when at the same time I was visiting from Oregon, some Klamath people there. And because they had been engaged in a similar struggle on the Oregon side against, I think it's called the Jindalee Mine Complex, is one proposed thing that they're combating with. So they've been working to sort of bring these different bands and impacted non-Native communities together in this struggle. But I think on the issue of economic development, I think that's also an important thing because this is something that I think just faces young people broadly right in the face. Whether you're if you're a white kid, black kid, Native American kid, there are no good jobs out there for young people. Or there are not so many.
Yeah, well, it's been that way for a while.
Yeah,
and this, I definitely think with the whole promise of like building industry back in the United States, people have this idea. It's like, okay, I can finally get blue collar job. I'll get that pension. I'll get that 401k or whatever. But like most of these extractive mining jobs like aren't very secure and they're extremely dangerous.
They're dangerous. They're temporary. Yeah.
And that's on top of everything that Dayton's brought up already.
But it's also the key thing, like with a lot of these mines, is like because they have to employ so much specialized workers so quickly that they can't physically hire people from these communities.
Oh,
right?
Absolutely not.
Right, and so for a lot of these communities, for folks on reservations, these mines are sold to them as a way to develop the community. But it's a lie. These mines.
It's always a lie whenever they're like, "Oh, we'll get you a job. We'll get you a job as a fry cook as we tear your house down." It's like,
Exactly.
what? I don't want to be fry cook. Like, what the fuck?
And so like we said, like these mines don't employ very many locals. They risk the health of the environment. But ultimately, it's like these native economies, they should be developed by native people, not just these outside companies. You just look at a good example. We're gonna go far, but if we just look at what's going on in Burkina Faso right now, you look at what Ibrahim Traore is doing. I don't know the most about his government, but I will say that he's followed some of these basic points from Thomas Sankara, in that native people should develop native economies, right? So in Burkina Faso, that means developing their agriculture without accepting foreign aid and thus foreign influence. And I think it's just this basic idea, right, like of self-reliance, that ultimately I think often Native peoples, we do understand that, we're not going to get the outside help to solve these issues. And I think that is a difficult thing. It's a difficult pill to swallow. And I think, but it's ultimately the clue that that development has to happen on our terms and the people's terms, and not the imperialists. Because we see what is development for Native Americans? Development for Native Americans is the destruction of our basic environment. It's the breakdown of our communities. It's the destruction of our ancestral way of life. Enough of that. No more. And so this is a developing story, and we'll have updates. If you want to learn more about my time for Mcdermit, like I said, I've linked an article to it in the description. I have any other closing thoughts, Dale?
Yeah, definitely. I'm really glad you went out there and have developed this connection with folks out there organizing. I think that's super important. Something that I really want to drive home is like there's a lot of different examples of these types of extractive mining processes happening domestically. I think recently there was a video documentary that was put out by Channel 5 News, written about copper mining affecting the indigenous community in Oak Flat, Arizona. I think it's called The Dark Truth About Copper Mining. I'll share a link in the video and in the description. And I mean, a lot of us remember at the end of Obama's first administration, there was the whole Standing Rock and the Keystone XL pipeline. There was a huge struggle there. And, there's been a number of times that pipeline has broken since it's been built, and we see how, even in recent years, this was like a really contentious thing for some reason. When bringing up like fracking in like Virginia and then also in like Oklahoma and a lot of these other states with these more like suburban rural communities where there aren't a lot of opportunities. But it ends up just poisoning people, and not really developing that many jobs and just ruining the environment as a whole. And so I think it's really important to just want to drive this point home that this affects everybody, even if people feel like it's like, oh, well, this is happening in some other place where it doesn't matter, like this is happening all across the United States. This happens all across the world, and it affects working class people, it affects regular people, you know. And I think that's, people have to understand that like it's in our interest to fight back against this. We've seen historically about different times that this has happened successfully, when this has happened. Like I think about, like with the coal wars that happened in West Virginia, and the miners eventually ended up organizing, multiracial solidarity in the early 20th century at a time that was really unheard of. And we're literally fighting these private detective agencies, fighting the state, fighting these corporations. It was some pretty intense stuff. That's why they call it the coal wars. It was a domestic war that happened over coal mining. And a big thing that Trump brings up is, oh yeah, like we gotta bring back coal mining. And it's like there aren't that many coal miners anymore. They've actually done a pretty good job of like bringing in like mechanization into that industry, but also like no, like mining sucks. Like let's just be real, and it's really bad for the people doing it. It's really bad for the people that lived around it. It's really bad for the environment in general. Doesn't actually do anything for the people that live in the area, and especially when we're talking about, land that should belong to people that's not the government, that are indigenous people. They should be able to determine whether or not they think it's a good idea if a corporation comes in and does this shit. Because 99% of the time, they're probably going to say no, because they realize a lot of these things. And we've seen a lot of the same stuff coming up throughout history. But yeah, and I think like it's also important to, the point that you're bringing up with like China having a monopoly, or at least like a dominant control over like rare earth minerals. I think that's really important. That's why they're looking to develop a lot more of this extraction domestically. That's why there's been a lot of struggles happening in Panama as well that we'll get into a little bit later on this podcast. But this is going to be a really big issue during this present administration, and even after, even if Trump gets elected out of office and we see another Democrat in power, whoever it might be, they're going to be doing the same stuff, whether we like it or not. And so I think it's really important for folks to recognize this is what's really happening. And just like the economics and the politics of it all are all